But the car was remarkable for what it was. Aerodynamics were world class. I mean, some of the lowest CD numbers ever achieved in a limited production car. But these were, I joke that they were Ferrari subsidized at the cost of a Fiat. People were not paying true market value what the car was.
All right, so today on the Plugged In podcast, we are interviewing Dean Case, and he was an engineer on the Ford Ranger EV and the Nissan Altra EV. And with me today is Matt Beardwood from Irvine, California.
Hello, everyone.
And I guess we're just going to start off with you. So how did your career start in the EV space?
Well, originally I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, got a mechanical engineering degree, and graduated in 1986, and ended up going to work for Mazda R&D down in Irvine, California. So right by where Matthew's from. Did 6 years at Mazda. We started to get into a little bit, in the early 90s, a little bit of alt fuels research. But we were just a satellite office of Mazda, so we saw bits and pieces, but not the whole picture. So an opportunity came up to join Ford in 1993. So I moved to Michigan and joined the Ford electric vehicle team. So I worked on a variety of EV programs there. Yeah, the only one that actually came to production was the Ranger EV. And then after 5 years of freezing in Michigan, we decided we wanted to come back to California. I actually turned down an opportunity with Toyota on their electric vehicle program, joined Nissan in a non-EV position, and then the Altra EV engineer in the department quit to take the job at Toyota that I turned down. And so I was asked to backfill his position at Nissan. So I ended up working on the Altra EV, and I had one as my daily driver from 1998 until I left Nissan in 2006. 2006 is when Nissan relocated their U.S. headquarters from Gardena, California to Nashville, Tennessee. And I went freelance after that, and I've been working for a variety of companies over the last, I guess, going on 15 years, including Motivo Engineering, which does a lot of really cutting-edge electric vehicles.
So when you worked at Ford with the Ranger EV, what would the process be like for the company to, because I'm assuming they essentially retrofitted an ICE vehicle into an electric vehicle?
Well, let's back up, actually. What happened was, in 1990, California Air Resources Board came out with the EV mandate, and the ZEV mandate, I should say, because at the time, emissions kept ratcheting down lower and lower. California was given an exemption from EPA to set their own emission standards, a long time ago, because we had horrible air quality in Southern California in the 60s and 70s. So California was given the authority to have stricter rules than the rest of the country. And other states, you don't want 50 states having 50 different emission standards, but California was granted this exception, and other states could either adopt the California standard intact or keep the federal. So for the longest time, you'd either have a California car or what they call a 49 state car. And California kept ratcheting down, and they have standards like there was the low emission vehicle, the LEV, and the ultra low emission vehicle, then the super ultra low emission vehicle. And they just kept going down and down. And the story I'd heard, and I've never verified this is true, but I believe it to be true. Dr. Paul McCready, who was the head of AeroVironment. Dr. McCready is one of these absolutely true geniuses. His company AeroVironment, they did the original Impact, which morphed into the EV1. They also did the Gossamer Albatross, the first human-powered airplane to fly across the English Channel, and just, incredible stuff. And supposedly, they were asking Dr. McCready, it's like, well, we're at super ultra low emission vehicles. How low is low enough? He goes, well, just set the standard at 0. It was an offhand comment from someone whose credibility was such that he could get away with that. And they said, fine, we'll make the mandate 0. So in 1990, they said that 2% of all cars sold in California by the largest car companies in California must be zero emission vehicles. So all of a sudden, everyone's scrambling in the early 90s, of the major automakers. So it didn't affect the minor players. So, Porsche and Ferrari were not worried about developing an EV for California, but obviously the major producers were. In the case of Ford, they started recruiting heavily from a variety of industries. So they came out to California, and we're looking at a lot of the people from the aerospace world and other high-tech companies to kind of come in for some fresh thought on how to develop their EVs. And, there was a lot of time, what are we going to do and reach the volume we need to hit? And what happened though is in 1995, CARB said, we're going to assess where the battery technology was. In 98, CARB backed off because they said, yeah, the battery technology of the 90s was junk. We used to have a big poster up in the conference room at Ford is liars, damn liars, and battery suppliers, because the batteries back then were just really bad. And trying to figure out how you could even get 50-mile range was a challenge. And back then, the best batteries were really nickel metal hydride in the 90s. And so what they came about was, okay, we're not going to make you sell 2% in 98 pure EV, but we still want you to show what the potential is there. So they came up with a memorandum of agreement, and the largest automakers would produce demonstration fleets. And the size of your fleet was somewhat based on your volume, but also the battery chemistry and what the energy density of the batteries were. If you produced a vehicle with lead acid batteries, you got 0 credit, nothing. So you had to have something of an advanced battery. So let me actually walk you through what the vehicles were of that era. I thought this might be interesting because there's some that everyone knows. General Motors had the EV1, clean sheet of paper that was designed to be an EV and nothing but an EV. And it got rave reviews. The people who leased it loved it. There was a lot of, the movie Who Killed the Electric Car. They were heartbroken that, they were all sent to the crusher. But these were functionally beta cars. They weren't really volume production cars.
And they had some of the best performance, is that correct? With the acceleration and range.
Yeah, acceleration, range. Of course, when you do a lot of those fast, you can do burnouts on EVs pretty easily. Tire wear was definitely an issue on some of these cars. But the car was remarkable for what it was. Aerodynamics were world class. I mean, some of the lowest CD numbers ever achieved in a limited production car. But these were, I joke that they were Ferrari subsidized at the cost of a Fiat. People were not paying true market value what the cars were. GM also had, they did an S10 electric, just to kind of, I don't know, I wasn't with GM, so I don't know what their philosophy on this was, but it also shows the inductive paddle charging system that GM developed, which is a very elegant solution, but something that Ford and the others never chose to adopt. Toyota had the RAV4 EV, which was really just a converted gasoline vehicle, and there are some people who really like these, and there's still a couple of those running around. Although I haven't seen one in a few years, and unless you had one of those old Chargers, there'd be no place to plug it in. They also had a little e-com, which was the only ones of these I ever saw were all right-hand drive. I don't think they ever made any left-hand drive ones. The interesting thing in Southern California is Toyota, Nissan, and Honda are all within, or at the time were within a couple of miles of each other. If you had good shoes, you could walk between the US headquarters of the Japanese big three. Since then, Toyota has also relocated. Ford, this is the project I worked on, which was, a base Ranger modified to be electric. And we'd gone through platform studies of every Ford vehicle out there, what would work. And we're trying to really figure out what would we lose the least money on, because all of these were massive money losers at the time, particularly when you're doing a limited production run. Ford and GM and Toyota, they do best when they're popping cars out 50 an hour out of an assembly plant and running a second shift. That's when they're profitable. When you're kicking out cars that are essentially hand built, it's a real challenge to make money on them. But we had full cooperation from the Ranger, the conventional Ranger team, if you will. And so a lot of things, we would negotiate, even getting like additional holes in the firewall for things we needed to run through the cab, and some other holes in the frame to accommodate what we were doing. So it was a pretty good relationship. The spec level on this vehicle became really bizarre though, because everything was dictated on weight and aero. And so we ended up having the most expensive wheels on the truck because the aluminum wheels weighed the least. But we also had the really cheap vinyl floor mats because the carpet kit weighed too much, so we didn't put the carpet in. So you bought this truck that had the nicest wheels and the cheapest interior because it was all driven by weight. We also had a tonneau cover for aero. We took one of these down to the Lockheed wind tunnel in Marietta, Georgia, and I did a full day of wind tunnel testing with this, which was really interesting. And this is a little thing. I don't know if you know about the rear suspension on the Ranger EV. It was a Dion rear axle. And here again, because of weight, we use composite leaf springs, but composite leaf springs had no lateral stiffness to them. So we had to add a Watts linkage to it. So a really sophisticated rear suspension, but all driven by, in essence, where do we package the batteries? Because the batteries we put between the frame rails. A lot of people ask, why didn't you just put the batteries in the bed of the truck? And that would have performed horribly on a crash. You couldn't make, if you put that much weight in the bed of the truck, you're not going to meet safety standards. And so we wanted to keep the batteries in one big pack between the frame rails. And so that took up most of the length of the frame. And so we ended up with a transverse mounted powertrain, which kind of led us into having to do a Didion axle to make it all packaged.
So you mentioned in one of the messages that these had lithium-ion batteries in them. Is that correct?
Not the Ranger. The Altra EV had lithium.
Okay. So was there any type of thermal management system for the Ranger batteries?
No, they were just air cooled a little bit. I think yeah.
So what type of degradation did they see?
That's a good question. I had already left before. I was leaving Ford about the time they were popping these out. I never heard of that many issues with it. Everyone, with the exception of Nissan, was using nickel metal hydride. And I mean, yes, there's degradation. They weren't as sensitive to heat, I think, as the lithium ions at the time. But I mean, ultimately, no one ended up pursuing nickel metal hydride beyond these early cars. I haven't heard that mentioned in 15 years as a viable battery for electric vehicles.
Yes, but in some Priuses, they do use nickel or for the hybrid battery system.
No, you're right. Yeah.
So what are some of the benefits? Because I know that they, if I'm correct, they weigh a little bit more and they do not have the same capacity, but they have better longevity. Is that?
I'm not the battery expert on that. I mean, at the time, it was just, this was what we believed to be state of the art in 1998. So sorry, I can't answer that one for you.
Okay.
So I assume it's rear wheel drive. Was there ever an option for like an all wheel drive? Or
no, just rear wheel drive. So here again, the cost and complexity. And here again, we struggled to get 50 miles range out of this. It was a struggle to get this thing to have any type of range.
So I think the question I have to ask is, for a rear wheel drive pickup truck with 50 or so miles of range, what would be a use of it? Maybe farm or something?
No, I mean, a lot of them ended up going to city fleets. Imagine, parking enforcement, things like that. I mean, it was interesting. Just recently, someone criticized LAPD for having a bunch of BMW i3s, saying, well, you could never chase a suspect in a BMW i3. It's like, well, most cities, police departments, fire departments, whatever, they have a lot of vehicles that are not going out code, red. They're not going under lights and sirens. They're just doing routine stuff, a very repeatable, range. So, you know, a lot of these early ones, particularly with Ford, Nissan, I believe Toyota and Honda, a lot of them were going to various cities. You know, you saw a city of Santa Monica, Pasadena, a lot of LA cities. We put hyper minis up in Sausalito. You know, they were doing all their parking enforcement with Nissan hyper minis, which only had about, you know, degraded battery, about 35-mile range. But that was enough to get around a very small town and do parking enforcement. So I mean, there's a lot of these. Let me go to another one here. Talk about range. You know, and a couple of them. This was a vehicle that was around in the early '90s by Ford. We had a fleet of these out in testing. This had a sodium sulfur battery that operated at, I want to think it was like 600 degrees F.
Is that the molten one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there was a couple.
I think the Think City had that, if I'm correct.
Might.
It was one of those weird Norwegian.
Well, Ford bought Think, but I thought they had already. There was a couple of what they call thermal runaways. We burned 2 of these to the ground, and so the belief was if you didn't have perfect thermal management, these had a lot of risk, and so Ford basically walked away from it. I mean, there was, you know, from an energy density standpoint, these batteries were phenomenal. I mean, the battery pack was very lightweight, very compact, but if you had a thermal problem, you had a big, big problem. And luckily, no one was ever hurt. There was 2 of them that burned down, but they were out. Luckily, they were outside.
So what would happen in an accident with molten batteries?
Well, as far as I know, Ford never had an accident with one of these. Certainly not a serious accident. The number of these vehicles out there was probably no more than 50. I mean, it was a very small, you know, test fleet. But, you know, here again, we were all experimenting. No one really knew the direction to go. And what's interesting is you look at the variety of vehicles that everyone put out. There was, with the exception of the Ranger and the S10, everyone was in a different market segment. You know, so it was kind of, you know, no one else built a 2-seater like GM. No one else did a minivan like we'll get to the Chrysler. But this is an E350 cargo truck, and Ford built 2 of these full electric, and our target market for this is we felt that we were going to go after companies like Frito-Lay and bakeries. Imagine you got a bakery, leaves the same bakery every morning at, you know, 4 a.m. or whatever it is, and drives around to a variety of supermarkets dropping off. So it's a diesel doing multiple cold starts throughout a day, but never traveling more than about 30 miles in a day, always going back to the exact same facility. And we thought this is perfect, that we're going to replace a gross polluting diesel with a clean electric with a very limited range, and, you know, perfect maintenance. And the first time we talked about this with CARB, they really liked that approach, that this is the clever thinking they were thinking of. But then we went back and we had the Ford Scientific Research Lab had crunched the numbers about what the pollution reduction would be compared removing these old gross polluting diesels off the road. And we needed a multiplier because there wasn't, you know, we wouldn't be able to sell, you know, several thousand of these. You know, there's not that many fleets for these vehicles. And so even if we replace the majority of them, it's still a limited number, and then they'd be in service for years and years. So it's not like we could sell them ongoing. And we had petitioned CARB for a multiplier to where if we do this, you know, the net improvement of air quality should allow us to have a deviation from their standard formula. And at first they said yes, then they changed their mind. So we built 2 prototypes, but never put one into actual use with a customer. So it was I think it was a missed opportunity, but the battery pack was humongous. That one we were actually, I don't remember why, maybe it was just cost. We were using NiCads. The battery pack, I remember, was 3,500 pounds, just the batteries. You know.
Wow. So how many kilowatt hours were they?
That's the same.
I don't remember. I'd have to see if I don't know if I have any I don't know if I kept any spec sheets. I mean, that was, it was 25 years ago. So
Yeah.
sorry, I don't remember the specs.
Yeah.
Honda had the EV Plus. Here again, lease only. And here again, most all these were lease only because at the end of it, no car company wanted to have the responsibility of parts and service training and everything else. You don't want someone buying this vehicle and then moving to Kansas, where the Honda dealer there has no way to know how to fix it, no parts and no high voltage safety equipment. These things most of them required specialized equipment to service. Chrysler did an electric minivan. This one also, I think it was the only one where they were playing around with fast charging at the time. And I remember seeing the fast charging set up at an EV conference, and the amount of current they were putting through was so heavy. They actually had to liquid cool the hoses. The electrical lines, they were liquid cooled because they were getting that hot. But Chrysler was doing kind of least cost of compliance, and I'm not sure who their fleets went to. I rarely ever saw these except at some of the various EV conferences where we would, the usual suspects would gather every few months at either Clean Cities or Electric Vehicle Symposium or some of these other events. And Nissan, this was the Altra EV, which was based on a Japanese gasoline vehicle called the Arnesa. And I had one of these as my daily driver for almost 8 years. And the battery degradation on this was pretty severe. The official range on this was, I think it was like 104 miles, but the best drivers could rarely get over about 85 in real world conditions. And by the end, after about 2 or 3 years, the batteries degraded to where they were only good for about 40 miles.
Wow.
Battery degradation on these early lithium ion batteries was really bad.
And these were running on lithium ions, you said?
Yeah, these were lithium ion batteries. And they're, Nissan did it because it was least cost of compliance. And keep in mind, in 1998, Nissan Corporation was about 20 billion in the red. This is before Renault stepped in and took some controlling interest of Nissan. So, they hadn't really turned the corner. Nissan really around 2000 through 2004 was really kind of where they were back up on the upward ramp. And so when they were doing this, when they had to make the decision of how they're going to comply with the California regulations, like what is the least cost of compliance? And if they did lithium ion, they only had to build 300 vehicles. Our fleet was, I think, 302. If they had done nickel metal hydride, I think the number would have been like 500 vehicles, because there was, based on the energy density of the battery chemistry we were using. But it was a fine vehicle to drive. I mean, I enjoyed it as my daily driver.
So as you talk about daily driver, I was just wondering, what do you drive now? Do you still drive an EV or?
Yeah, actually, I just bought it in the end of 2018. I bought a used 2016 Nissan Leaf.
Oh, awesome.
Because I mean, the real bargains on EVs is in the used market.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because the resale value is relatively poor. So I looked at a BMW i3, I looked at a Fiat 500e, and ultimately I settled on the Leaf for a variety of reasons.
Is it the because I know they brought out the larger battery pack in the 2016s, the
32? Yeah, that's the one
yeah.
I've got. Yeah. And actually, this is me. I'm not sure why I have such a bad look on my face, but this was me at Nissan headquarters in Gardena. So we had chargers there. So I could charge. It's pretty easy. I leave my house with a full charge. I'd leave the office with a full charge. So that made having a limited range relatively easy. And one of the fun perks at the time, keep in mind, there was very few. I mean, the total population of electric vehicles in California was probably under 2,000, maybe 3,000 vehicles at its peak. And I had carpool lane access, but rarely did I need it. Once in a while, I'd use the carpool lane going up to downtown LA. But the best perk was I got free parking in the short-term lot at LAX. So I could park right by Terminal 1, walk over, take my flight, be gone for a week, come back. You roll up and it's like a $400 parking bill. And he said, no, it's electric. And then you have to find the manager, then it'd be waived. So I could park in the EV. I could get free charging and parking at LAX. That no longer exists. That was eliminated sometime in the early 2000s.
And they do have those the same stickers that they do now, the same design, which is interesting. Because my Volt has some of those stickers on them.
Yeah.
I think they're green from.
Yeah, there's a lot of color coding now, and they've changed the rules multiple times. I'm not even current on the HEV lane rules. This was the Hyper. This car was a blast to drive. It was a very small car. I mean, it's about the size of a smart car. And this one we stickered up. We used this at the Michelin Challenge Bibendum in 2000. I think we used it twice in 2001, 2003. So we were doing that with Michelin. It was a fun little project. But this was a blast to drive, right-hand drive. It was kind of original Mini Cooper type handling, very short wheelbase. It was a blast. And then I joke here, what was the Mazda EV at the time? Anyone asked me, what was the Ranger? Because Ford had controlling interest of Mazda, and Mazda had no budget to do an EV at the time. So anyway, that was kind of a little slideshow. Those were all the vehicles that were in operation in the late 90s, early 2000s. But virtually all of them have been, crushed. A handful went to various museums. If you go up to the Peterson, I know that Nissan, they have an EV1. Nissan, we gave them an Altra EV and one of the Hyper Minis. And I think the California Auto Museum may have a couple of those similar vehicles. Very few were sold though. I mean, Ford sold a few Rangers. Toyota sold a few RAV4 EVs, but I think that's it.
Mm-hmm. And so one question I'd like to ask is, do you see any parallels between these vehicles and I forgot what year it was implemented, but I'd say 2013, California and Oregon with the compliance cars?
No, I mean, these were, here again, everyone, there was huge enthusiasm. When I joined the Ranger program in '93, I mean, we thought we're inventing the future. And, it was a lot of excitement, but as you really figured out just how bad the batteries were of that era, and just it was not economically viable, that no one would buy the vehicles at the price point they would need to be. And we couldn't afford to subsidize that many. A funny true story that happens, General Motors was getting, with their EV1, a lot of celebrities to lease them. And so they were getting a lot of Hollywood A-listers to lease the EV1. And they tried to get Jay Leno to go on. And if you know anything about Jay Leno, huge car guy, true enthusiast. And he gets his hands dirty. He works on a lot of his own cars. The guy, really sharp. But he will not lease a car. He owns every car he has, he owns. And he's philosophically opposed to leasing. So when GM, Jay, we'd like to have you get an EV1. Well, can I buy it? No, I'm not interested. So Ford, we actually arranged to have Jay test drive one of the Rangers. And I've got a video of it. It's pretty funny. And he liked it. And then he asked me, you want to buy one? He goes, 30,000 for a truck that only goes 50 miles? Yeah, no. So he wasn't willing to spend the money based on the limited use of the truck. And Jay loves alternative, he's got steam powered cars, and he's got, turbine powered cars and all kinds of crazy stuff. But that was kind of how we kind of thought that, selling versus leasing would kind of set us apart from GM. But, it's a limited market. But so, the enthusiasm of inventing the future kind of tapered off when we realized that it just wasn't economically viable at that time. So, I mean, now, and here again, we're still waiting to see, how's all this going to pencil out. I mean, car costs are coming down, particularly when you can produce a car at volume. there's a lot of benefit there because there's this kind of referred to kind of a little the valley of death. If you're Ferrari, you can hand build works of art and charge 500,000, and there's a waiting list to buy a Ferrari because it's a piece of art. And then you can do high volume cars at a profit, but anything in between is really, really difficult to be profitable on. So, well, I like the cat joining us here.
Yeah. But
So it's going to be interesting to see what shakes out, and it's interesting with all these EV startups, and autonomous startups. When I talk to engineering students, I do a lot of work with SAE student groups, and I think it's an exciting time to be entering the industry. So I think, since you two are both aspiring to enter the industry, I think about 4 years from now, it's hard to tell what's going to be new and exciting. We got all this convergence of electrification, autonomous, ride sharing, although COVID's really kind of making people think, do I really want to share a car with people that I don't know their hygiene habits and things? But it is an exciting time to be in the industry.
And I think rideshare, it's kind of different around here in North Carolina because having a car is something you want to have. You want to have the freedoms, not in, I guess maybe in some larger cities that would make more sense, but for some more rural places like here where you have to drive 12, 15 miles to get to the grocery store, or you want to just stuff like that. I guess that has more, you could see the electric car or ride sharing being more prominent in areas like that, but I just don't see ride sharing working everywhere.
No, I agree with you 100%. But it's interesting just the number of companies or startups, particularly in the autonomous space, but also EVs. You got Rivian, you've got Lordstown, you've got the independent electric vehicle company. You've got we're waiting to see which Chinese car companies might come into the U.S. You could go back in history and look at prior to the Model T. I mean, there was if you count all the car companies have ever tried to start, and I think just the U.S. there was like over 3,000 car companies, and most of them built one or two prototypes and never went into production. And then when the Model T came along, it wiped out probably 2,800 of those because it was just no one could compete against that. And then the Depression wiped out a bunch of others. So I think a lot of these EVs, there's a lot of enthusiasm, and it seems to be relatively easy to raise capital in today's world than it was in 1902 or whatever. But I think a lot of these EV and autonomous startups are going to go bust. They're just, they don't all have a better idea. Some of them do, and some of them are going to get purchased by major car companies. You keep seeing back and forth. What is companies like Apple going to do? Are they going to do a car? Are they going to just team up with somebody? They want to be in everybody's operating system. So huge unknowns ahead.
Yeah, I agree. So I've actually also watched the movie Who Killed the Electric Car, and I was just wondering, since you've been in the electric industry for so long, do you see any parallels from back then to what killed the electric car to now? Like besides the cost?
Yeah, I mean, they had an agenda with that movie. I mean, it wasn't GM was evil that they're taking away these cars. They were a test fleet. It was a very large public test fleet. But the reality is car companies crush cars all the time. I mean, that was one of the first rude awakenings when I started at Mazda. I remember I'd only been there a few months, and we had a couple of cars that were going to the crusher that had less than 5,000 miles each. The cars looked virtually brand new, but they were prototypes, and no one is going to sell a prototype. The risk, the risk reward is just such that why would I take the risk of having you buy a car that was a test car? Because if you get, and here's the hypothetical, you get into an accident with that car 10 years from now, and let's say there was nothing wrong with the car, you got T-boned, and then the other driver sues you and finds out, oh, well, this was a test car. All of a sudden, what they're going to do, they're going to sue the company who made the test car. And so, car companies look at liability aspects And here again, do you want to have the risk, the cost of maintaining parts inventory and training? I mean, one of the most remarkable things to me for electric vehicles is the fact that, as far as I know, no technician has ever been seriously hurt or killed servicing a car. We used to have big signs up when we'd have the battery packs open at Nissan. Uh, do not touch this. It will not hurt you. It will kill you. I mean, high voltage is serious. And you find with most automotive technicians, uh, the way a service shop runs is they call a flat rate manual. A brake job is rated at 38 minutes or whatever. And so you as the technician, you're going to get paid for 38 minutes. You can do it in 30, you're getting a bonus. I mean, a really good technician can actually get paid for more hours in the day than they were there if you're faster than the book, which is very, very difficult to do. And one of the ways you could be faster is if you kind of cheat and don't follow some of the safety precautions. And if you got capacitors, you need to let them dissipate. You got to test your high voltage safety gloves. Well, forget it. I'm not going to spend the time testing the gloves. That's going to take 5 minutes. Or I don't feel like putting the gloves on. I'll just take this apart without the gloves. So the fact that we've never, as far as I know, hurt anybody across the industry is remarkable. But
Yeah, and
you don't want to sell these and have the hobbyist, hot rodding their EV1. So I mean, now you have no choice because we're trying to do these mass market, and there are companies who are, you can buy performance enhancements for your electric vehicle from some companies now.
mm-hmm. Yeah, but back to the crushing, it's pretty unfortunate because I wasn't really familiar that a lot of companies did that, so they can't give them to employees or anything like that.
No, and even a lot of it comes down to insurance. There was I'm trying to think how many years ago, probably about a decade ago, there was a cargo ship coming from Japan, the Cougar Ace, and it went sideways. It got stuck in a sandbar, and it took like a month and a half to get the ship righted. So there was 3,000 Mazdas sitting on an angle for a month.
Oh, wow.
And so all the battery acid was leaking out, the fluids and everything were leaking. After you sit not vertical or not proper for a month, you got problems. All 3,000 cars were sent to the crusher.
Wow.
Because here again, the insurance paid off, but there was, we were trying to even get them donated. Like, let's give them to a fire department to do safety training on. Let's let them set fire to it and put it out, or do rescue work on it. Nothing. There's also cars, if it comes from another country, and this is common with all the imports, it'll be what they call a TIB car, a temporary import bond. So if we bring in a car for testing from Japan, we don't pay any duty on it. And so at the end, we brought it in for a 1-year test. At the end of the test, we have, I think, basically 3 options: ship it back to country of origin, pay the temporary import bond, which is costly, or send it to a crusher, and someone from U.S. Customs will be there to verify that the car the VIN matches. We haven't pulled the motor, we haven't pulled the interior out of it. It goes in complete with stereo equipment, all the nice seats, everything destroyed. And so some of it, there's legal issues, there's customs issues, but it is sad. There's a lot of cars that have to go to the crusher.
Yeah, because it's almost like they could take out some of the working parts that they have tested, like interior and stuff, and just put them up for sale cheap for people. Yeah.
But here again, risk reward.
Mhm.
You have to think on a liability standpoint. I was able, at times, I was able to get some cars donated to universities, for collegiate projects and labs. I got some engines donated to various schools for their dyno labs. But it's very challenging because liability drives a lot of our decisions.
So then whatever happened with your Nissan Altra EV?
I think it got crushed.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that one in particular. And actually, I ended up, I didn't drive the exact same one for the entire. Sometimes it was rotate around because we were trying to manage the battery where who needed a few extra miles to get their daily commute in. So they were all the same silver. We had all 300 Ultras were the exact same spec. You know,
Hmm. And
Was
then
that
just sort of,
no? You
yes,
can
sir.
go.
No,
I
you
was
can
just
go.
gonna ask, I was gonna ask you, was it a J1772 the plug, or is it like a proprietary one?
no, Nissan used the. They were the only other company that adopted the inductive paddle charger that GM had.
Oh right.
At Ford, you have to realize the rivalry between Ford and GM and such that uh, they don't like to cooperate, and that's why I think long-term success of EVs depends on common standards for charging. And it's frustrating. I think a lot of people are frustrated that Tesla doesn't want to play well with others. It's kind of like Tesla says we're doing whatever we want, but as a consumer, you want to know that you could just pull up to any charger and plug in. But back then, they ended up doing. It became an SAE standard, but there was two SAE standards back in the late '90s. There was the inductive standard that GM basically pushed. Nissan adopted it, and then Ford and Honda took the lead in developing a conductive charger, which is it's actually not nearly as elegant as the one that's currently the 1772 standard.
And I think that is important to have consistency across all the electric vehicles.
Yeah,
Because, for instance, right now, if you're looking at Nissan Leaf, for example, they have the CHAdeMO chargers. Is that how it's pronounced?
CHAdeMO.
Okay. And they have those, but there was a 2018 Leaf I was checking out a few days ago, and it did not have DC fat. I mean, it has a CHAdeMO in there, which is just,
Yeah. Well,
it's
fun.
it's kind of confusing for consumers who
Yeah,
aren't
it is.
familiar with it. And then,
Yeah,
for instance, like some of these bolts, when they're new, you have to charge or you have to pay $750 extra to get the DC fast. So
yeah,
that means in the used market, especially like if you're buying from online, maybe most online places show you pictures, but if you don't have access to what options it has, a lot of them don't take the picture of the charge
right.
port. So you
Yeah,
might buy a car assuming it has fast charging and it may not. And it's confusing. I mean, not for me,
yeah.
but if you're new in
No,
the
you're right.
electric world,
No,
yeah,
the three of us are EV geeks, so it's that we're not normal. So,
yeah,
but it's funny. I have the fast charge capability in my Leaf. I have never used it, not once, and I don't plan to. One, the cost, but two, just the battery degradation. I'm skeptical on that. And the reality is, I mean, the reality. I hate it when people push like everyone should have an EV. No, everyone shouldn't. But there's a huge market where it makes perfect sense. And my situation is like a perfect example. Two-car family. We have a Subaru Crosstrek and a Leaf. Virtually, we drive the Subaru maybe once a week. We drive the Leaf daily. And that's partly a little different just because of the pandemic and everything. But the reality is, for anything that's under 100 miles, the Leaf's the best car to take.
Mhm.
And if you have a two-car family, having one being an EV is perfect. If you're a one-car family, I'm not sure if an EV is really the best thing for you. That might be best to have a plug-in electric or just a regular gasoline vehicle.
yeah.
Um,
And I think something like my Chevy Volt, for example, driving around town, all in
yeah.
electric, 53 miles of electric range, and then
Hmm.
if I need to go to college, I just run on the generator, and it's just
Right,
seamless. It's easy to
right.
understand, and that's one question I want to ask you because you're in the industry. What do you feel about series hybrids versus parallel hybrids?
Here again, it's I think different market segments, it makes sense depending on what your duty cycle is. And it's kind of like all these chatter. Well, I'm not going to buy an EV until it's got 500-mile range and it's the same price as a gasoline. Well, it's the same methodology. People bought a 3-row SUV because they might buy a boat. People are massively overbuying on vehicles. I I was very interested in potentially buying a Toyota Mirai, uh, because I'm right by a fuel station here, and the discounts they were giving on them were insanely
Even
high.
used, they're doing $10,000 in free fuel, I think.
Well, this was $20,000 off the price, then the tax credits plus the free fuel.
And you're in
Uh,
California, so you get
and-
the was it 2,500?
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
so it was going to be a $51,000 car for 18,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for me, the fatal flaw was there was still leather in the interior. I'm vegan, and I'm not buying any car that has leather in the interior. So
Hmm.
I joke that one of my thresholds is you're not an environmental vehicle if you have leather in it. You got a dead cow in the car. Sorry, you're not environmental. That's just
But that
me
is,
personally.
yeah, and that is interesting with the Mirai because I was looking used. You can find them for about 10 grand right now.
Yeah,
And then they'll give you 10,000 in free fuel, even on the
yeah,
used ones, which is
yeah.
just insane.
But yeah, I can't imagine you finding fuel easily in North Carolina. And here again, if you went into the
There's
Toyota,
none.
right, and then and even if there was a fuel station, you go to your local Toyota dealership, they're going to look, sorry, don't know how to work on it. We've never been trained.
Yeah, I live right next to a fuel station as well. Well, one of my good friends actually has a Mirai.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite funny actually because like she thinks
Yeah.
it's the best in the world. It's just yeah, it runs on hydrogen.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this, though, there is a certain education, that people are reluctant to embrace. I mean, when I did driver training on the Altra, I would explain to them, I go, this is not a car. This is an airplane that runs on the ground. You have to do pre-flight planning. You get into your regular gasoline vehicle, you start heading to your destination, then you look at the fuel gauge. Oh, I need to stop and top off. You think about it, you go to LAX, you hope the pilot flying to Charlotte check the fuel gauge in the plane before taking off, that you do pre-flight planning. Where am I going? What's the range? Are there available chargers? And I get frustrated, on my phone, some of the stuff that you can't find one, there's no one location that tells you about all the chargers. The charge point is great to tell you all their locations, including which ones are free. Uh, but that doesn't tell me the EV Go ones. I shouldn't have to shop through 7 different, websites to figure out if there's a charging
There's
station.
plug share.
But none of them have everybody, I don't think.
Huh.
Plug share have
'Cause-
everybody?
Yeah, PlugShare does. Almost
Okay.
everyone. Yeah, because
I'll
they show Electrify America, ChargePoint,
Okay,
just random level twos, just
Volta.
Volta. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I have to look at their site. I haven't. The only account I have is with ChargePoint, so that's
Yeah.
the one I normally use. And then plus just I'll hit Nissan dealers or something because I can charge at the Nissan dealership for free. So
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess it looks like our time is heading up to about an hour. So I'd like to thank you for coming on. It was a very interesting
yeah,
conversation.
would like at some point we need to get some of my colleagues from Motivo
Oh,
and
wow.
talk about they've worked on a lot of projects. The funny thing about working for a company like Motivo is they're an engineering product development company, and the vast majority of projects they work on, I can't discuss publicly who the client was. We can talk in a little bit general terms. And they finally ended up doing one project that an internal one they spun off as a separate company, which became Monarch Tractor. So they've got an electric autonomous tractor, and
Hmm.
a lot of the EV technology was lessons learned on multiple OEM projects and other EV startups. So they've done electrified vehicles for. They did an electric boat for a guy who wanted to be the Elon Musk's of boats. They built a prototype for him with a complete uh, tier 1 supply chain bill of materials, but he's never found the money, I guess, to put it into production. They've done electric airplanes, electric cars, and ultimately a tractor really makes a lot of sense because think about this, you got this small organic farm. Do you really want a diesel tractor putting diesel particulate all over your organic strawberries? So an electric tractor makes a ton of sense.
And no
For farm.
maintenance, very little.
low
Yeah.
maintenance, and also now it's a power source out on, out in the field.
And
Mhm.
oil to get into the.
So take a look at monarchtractor.com.
All right.
And I'll send you some links. We've done on the SA SoCal front here. We've done a couple of interesting seminars that are electric vehicle related. We had some people. We did a panel discussion about the California 2035 mandate. How
Hmm.
that's going to come along. So, but anyway, fun talking with you
Yep.
guys.
Yep.
Look forward
Nice
to
talking with you.
watch your career. So hope get involved on one of the Formula SA electric cars or something when you get to college.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
Okay.